Hi, and welcome to my small presentation. I want to kind of redo all of history for you because we've been under deception for centuries. And I want to explain that to you now. But it's important that you gain the concepts that I am going to teach today because our education system, our churches, our government, everything has stolen the truth from all of us. So let's begin with a fundamental concept in Roman law, and it is mundus vult decepi. And I've got a little reminder here, and I'm going to put this on the. I've been bound by this plastic bag, so I'm under the deception. And the rule is the world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived. That's actually ancient law. But remember, if we're deceived by law, then we are deceived. So I'm going to put that on my bag as well. And we know this doesn't come from our Creator. Our Creator gave us unalienable rights. But if we can take away those unalienable rights and replace it with Roman law, we can take things from you. We can steal from you, and it's okay because of this law, of the deceiver. So let's take a little walk back in history and see how that happens. Okay, back in 1302, Pope Boniface, in his secular office of the Roman Pontiff, they decided, well, we want to do some things for all the living. And they had a great idea. They wanted to put things in jurisdictions of land, air, and water. You know this as law, but did you know that's where the acronym, the word comes from? So I've created these three bags here to represent the land, air, and the water. And we know in Genesis, by the law of kinds, that we live on the land and soil. The top 5 inches of the soil is where we live. Underneath, like 6 foot under, we're dead. But the land connects us to all other things and the separations from other groups of individuals. So this was important for the foundation of our treaties, our agreements between groups of people, living men and women. So we have the land, which is a living jurisdiction. Then we have the air. And I have this bag here, and it represents a dead jurisdiction. Because if we jump off of a cliff, we die. We can't live in the air. Or at least we didn't back then. And similarly, if we breathe water like the fish, we die. So the water is a dead jurisdiction. But we have treaties that are based upon these three jurisdictions, land, air, and water. And that becomes very important because the founders of this country knew the importance of what was going on in that secular office. And they knew that we needed to preserve our unalienable rights under our Creator and not be deceived under the Roman law. But let's see what happened. So we stand as living men and women under the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so let me get that straight right now. After the war we had won, we actually have a 1779 Naturalization Act. And it said, well, you look like a Tory, and I look like a Tory, but I'm an American now, so I want to stand on the land and soil of America and have the laws of this land apply to me. So we can actually use that. You see this bag, the bound of Roman law on me, so I'm just going to remove that right now. And you can too. And you'll see the site that I represent on my shirt here in the background. I can talk about that later. But let's get on with, we won the Revolutionary War. And that created entities in all three jurisdictions. So the first is the 1787 Constitution for the United States of America. And you'll see some important things on this label. The is capitalized because it's the one and only. It's the proper noun in our English language. Okay. Also, it was lowercase united because the states in our land are like nations. So, but they came together and were united. And that's why we have the Constitution. And notice it's the word for. Because in commerce, and that's Roman law, in commerce, UCC code, the word of can mean without. So this is actually our land government, our living land government. as opposed to the 1789 Constitution, we actually gave this to the Brits, and it became incorporated. So this is a British incorporation. So the king, the crown, is the living man responsible for that Constitution. And notice the lowercase the. And similarly, and we probably never knew this, but we have 3 constitutions. So we also have the heir constitution, and that is the 1790 Constitution of the United States. So I'm going to put that one here. And that one is the Pope. That's a papal agreement to be our patent offices and our house Washington, D.C., and do the postal services, our mail. So that's an incorporation. So the Pope is responsible for that. And we probably didn't know that. Okay, so these are very important as we go forward because of what's happened. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But let me talk about myself first. My name is Michael Lee McGowan. And in English, I would represent that in all lowercase letters. Because I've taken off my bounds. I'm not bound to anybody by any contract. So there's an ancient maxim that says, once a thing is done, it must also be undone. So I told you the way to get my bounds off was to remove the plastic bag, and I can actually do that through the 1779 Naturalization Act. What was good then is good now. I can basically tell these other government providers that I'm not part of their contract. So the problem we have is that deception comes in the other forms of and use of our names. And so when we are born, we are immediately given birth certificates. Okay? Let me grab an example of a birth certificate. And I'm going to put that in a trust. And we actually begin in this jurisdiction of water. Because we gave this to the king, and in the Civil War, they usurped our land government. So our parents, unknowingly, throw us into dead jurisdiction. We become legal persons. We're no longer unalienable rights as creations under the Creator. We've got a contract with Satan. So that's neatly inside here. And we probably never knew it before, but cursive is curse of the sea. That's where that term comes from. And often this is made in upper and lower case, and that tells me that I am a servant. And so I'm going to place that one here on the water jurisdiction. Now this is actually a trust. It's called an infinite decedent estate. And it's really not me that gets named in that birth certificate. It's my twin brother, in my case. And we've taken away the term physician and replaced it with the water term doctor. Doctor. So you don't know it, but by putting you in this jurisdiction, and we didn't have the physiology knowledge back in the day. So when you come out of your mother's birth canal, water term, and there's the afterbirth. And sorry for this descriptive language, but that was considered going through water, and then it kind of it has life for just a few seconds after birth. And so they thought, well, this is another living man. But it's actually the name of your twin, the afterbirth, that gets put into this infinite decedent. And so it's a dead seaman's estate. It's actually an officer in the British Merchant Marines. And you don't know this, and so you don't make any claim on this. And so 7 years later, as a biblical process, the Pope is contacted, and says, well, nobody claimed this, so we're going to put that trust inside another trust. So the British officer is put inside and sealed up in another jurisdiction. And now we use another name, and this one's in all caps. And that's a slave. And if you'll carefully read the 14th Amendments of the Air and Water Constitutions, you'll see that they both have a 14th Amendment that says, oh, no more public slavery, but now you're a private slave. Every debt that's ever owed is now responsible by the U.S. citizens or citizens of the U.S. And both of those names are inside the Roman jurisdiction of the air jurisdiction. Okay, so now let's see some other interesting things that happen. If we talk about money, okay, if I'm a living man, I'm owed value for my labor. Everything that I do is made payment, or I'm giving something in trade. Okay, so I should have silver or gold or something of value for everything that I do. And that's due the living man. It's not due the fictions that have been created in the likeness of me. Okay, this is a critical thing to believe. So I'm going to put the silver in the land jurisdiction. Okay? Now, we don't allow Burger King or any other corporation to print money and make money. Although we've allowed our government services contractors who basically said, oh, the Americans have been missing since the Civil War. So we gave them the opportunity to print money. So they create money, legal tender, because that's in their law. And we're going to put this inside the air jurisdiction. But guess what? I'm owed the silver. Okay? So for every dollar that's an IOU without a repayment date, I am owed the silver. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Well, over time, the patriots have figured out the problem, and it has taken decades to go back and restore all of this, because once a thing is done, it must be undone. So if we look back in history, we find that at the time around the Civil War, the water and air jurisdictions usurped our land jurisdiction. So we didn't realize it, but our Congress adjourned sine die without a date to reconvene. So the other contractors put everything in a trust, right? That's in a U.S. trust or state trust. So everything becomes sealed up. And because you are known as these other names, you never know how to operate as a living man. So we need to be able to figure out how to undo this terrible mess. How do I get to the stuff that's inside, right? But to undo that, I first have to be able to undo this first layer. And when we find out the code and we look inside the municipal code of Washington, D.C., of the Roman law, we find out, and I credit this with the fiduciary of the United States Incorporated is Anna Maria Reisinger. And you can find out more information on her site. She's got thousands of articles and videos. And it's annavonrights.com is her pen name. So what they discovered is that in the Washington, D.C. law, that they offer a reversionary trust interest to the military to be able to gain access to this, to break open this trust. Okay, but here's the trick, is that inside here, the beneficiary is not me, the living man, but rather that naval agent. So once I've taken off the bindings of the Roman law using the Naturalization Act, I'm returning to standing on the land and soil. And now I get access to all my names, including that merchant mariner that is stuck deep inside these layers. So we claim our reversionary interest like a military person, and we can open up this first layer, and then that allows us, and we see that things like my driver's license and those kinds of things get exposed, because you'll see on your driver's license, this is all capital letters. This tells me I've been under the Roman deception. I'm under their law. I need this in order to drive, but I don't. If I'm a living man, I'm not required to do that. I have an unalienable right to travel so that I can get travel and have employment, so that I can pay and provide living and substance for my family. Okay, so once we get inside this trust, now we have exposure to the things that are owed to us. So now for every dollar that I've ever made in wages, they owe me gold and silver. Every one that's ever been done. And this is craziness. Okay, so we find that they tried to steal from us by borrowing our assets and returning worthless currency, legal tender. They gave us worthless paper for what we're doing. But we've made the challenges and the conflicts has been resolved. We're about to get all of our credit back. Because when we borrow money, or when the corporations borrow money, there's an equal offsetting credit to the debit, right? So by algebra, we know that if you put a 1 in the debt column, there's an equal offsetting 1 in the credit column, so that they balance each other out. Well, where's the national credit that goes with the national debt? And even worse, if I borrow this from a living man, then how can I go back and charge that living man interest on my borrowing of money from them? It doesn't make sense. So there's no such thing as a national debt and interest on the national debt. That's all fiction, because back when I had the bag on, that's living under the lie. Okay, so finally, we can now expose and get access to our birth certificate and everything that's owed to us, because now we may be a beneficiary as the seaman, and that's where all the money and everything goes. Everything was owed to that naval officer. But once I've exposed and taken off the bindings of the lie, now we've got full disclosure, and now all 3 jurisdictions are open to me, and I can gain access. And you can too. If we begin this process and stand on the truth, then we all have access to decatrillions that have been stored up in the storehouse. But they know that by making us slave and by keeping our assets and our wealth, our credits from us, that they've put us into the binds and made us susceptible to all their law. So let's undo it and join me. I thank you for your time.